This is part 3 of Uncommon Conversations, episode 28. And today my guest is Alex Conn, who's a very interesting, very well-spoken guy. And we've been going through all sorts of topics. It's a fascinating conversation. He's about to hop on. We're about to make this happen.
All right. So we were talking about this, like, the only thing is, and I do believe that, like, there has to be, I don't necessarily believe in, as somebody who, I don't necessarily believe, like, I'm somebody who I definitely believe that when a kid grows up in a single parent household, I think that they're lacking something. And there is like kind of a need, I think, a biological and a psychological need for two parents, whether they're homosexual or whether it's two moms, two dads.
Well, it's literally twice the parenting, twice the number of hours. Like, there's 168 hours in a week. So one person, 168 hours. Two people, 336.
Yeah, you need that psychologically. But I also would argue that I think that, like, if you know anybody that's like, but I also would say that there's a lot of people I know. There isn't the other thing that I think, especially with parenthood, that I think is an issue, and I think with you that I think leads kids to a very one of the things that I do think that is interesting, and with that, because I think a lot of people will just blame the parents, and that's like a thing that will happen, and I always, like, that's almost always like the right wing attack whenever
societal issue pops up.
Whenever specifically a societal issue, but very specifically whenever a school shooting happens, there's always like blame the parents. One, like, and often that's like very true. Like an example where that is almost incredibly true is an example where I actually think it's very interesting for me is that's completely like an outsider is Dylan Klebold. Dylan Klebold had really amazing parents. In fact, Sue Klebold has gone on this like really interesting tour, kind of promoting mental health. But her kid shot up, did one of the most well-known mass shootings in American history. So,
which one was it?
Columbine.
Was that
Columbine.
Oh, Columbine. Okay. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I always am really interested in, like what causes things. Like that's something that fascinates me. Because like I do think, like, especially like this goes back. Sorry if I'm just deviating from a lot of shit.
Stop apologizing.
Okay, cool. Because like, for instance, this is what really interests me is that I do think that bullying leads to mass shootings. I think that that's just something that is. By the way, do you mind if I just hop off for like a second and get some water?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, cool. Bye-bye.
You can leave the camera going if you want. I'll just rant while you're gone.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. It's interesting. I just talked about not that long ago the idea that resentment can build in you as a human being by acknowledging the limitations and the faults of the world and of man. And if you let that fester enough, especially if you've been bullied, especially if you've been victimized by society, it's very easy to hold those resentments, and those resentments tend to culminate. And if you don't have the right way to sort of process those resentments and to turn them into positive things, school shootings can happen. And I think that Jordan Peterson is more so the person that's put that at the feet of school shootings than I have. I'm just sort of going off of his directive, but I haven't heard anything that I feel like is more on the point or accurate than to just say, stay hard.
All right, I'm back.
All right, cool. Yeah, so we were just talking about school shootings and what can sort of culminate in causing that type of a thing.
Yeah. I think, again, I think gun control is something that is an easy fix in some ways. I don't think it's as much of a. I don't think it's like a complete panacea, like most Democrats would say, because I think we already have like so many guns in America that you can't really do that much about it. But I think if you did like the basic kind of democratic things, you would at least, I think, cut them in half. I would say like a ban on assault rifles is something that I think should be at least considered. Check. I think that's kind of a self-evident thing. And definitely closing the gun show loophole. Like those are things that I think should happen. But also, I think we need to look at mental health, and not in like the Republican way of it's mental health, because what happens all the time in when we have a mass shooting is Democrats pushing like gun control legislation, and then Republicans do two things. Republicans say it's not the right time, and then they push it off, they push it off, they push it off, and then they also say it's mental health, but they don't push any legislation to solve the mental health mental health. They don't do anything, and then they just push it off, and then the issue goes untalked about until the next mass shooting. And this is what happened.
Republicans will make that point. You're absolutely true. But yeah, I don't ever hear Republicans pushing forward, and this is what we've got to do to handle this issue. They just defend the Second Amendment. They don't acknowledge or address the school shootings issue in any sort of policy way.
Yeah, in order to policy ways. Like there was I still remember the school walkout. Like I had the flu that day, but and I couldn't go, but I would have been. I remember because the March for Our Lives kids are my age, so I know that age very well, and I feel like I remember that movement very well, and yeah, I'm very much in favor of I'm more mixed on the assault weapons ban than I used to, but I'm definitely in favor of universal background checks. And I'm definitely in favor of universal background checks, probably stricter on handguns, because more guns come from handguns. But there is that great, I think it was Ben Franklin, which is like, but I think that there needs to be, you need to sacrifice some liberty to security. But I also think that like you have to like go by that Ben Franklin quote, which is like those who trade liberty for security deserve none. And I think that's the case for mass surveillance. I think that's the case for guns. In some ways, I think we can do some amount of gun control, but I also value the freedom of the gun owner to to buy as much guns as they want.
I absolutely agree with you that we need to have a more open and willing conversation about gun control, and also like be willing to entertain gun control measures. Now, I've done that, and more or less my conclusions are that the good that would be done by most of those measures is very negligible. And there's other things we can do that will be much more meaningful and impactful in terms of solving these problems. Now, amongst the gun control things, some of them are just stupid to me, only out of ignorance. Meaning like the clip size regulation. Literally, all someone has to do is have 3 clips with 10 rounds instead of one clip with 30 rounds, and
no, I agree with you.
You've totally gotten around that. Another example is the putting your gun in a safe. If you need a gun to fight off a burglar, being like, "Excuse me, burglar, 1 second," like that. Obviously, that's not going to work. So, and so that's an issue. I think background checks would be good, more so to just sort of track who is dangerous and trying to get a gun. It'd be like a reporting system would be better. I don't know. But I think that the background check like many areas have that background check, or they do a level of a background check, and it doesn't prevent anything, because many of these people that are school shooters, they're so young, they don't have a record, or they're fresh out of high school, so it's like they haven't had time to develop any kind of a record.
But you look at the guy in
There
Florida.
are early warning signs that need to be, addressed and acknowledged.
But you look at the kid in Florida. You look at the kid that, like, in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas school. That dude was like basically a school shooter in training. Like that kid was like fucked up from like day one.
The Dayton, Ohio shooter had issued a rape list, had written a rape list in the girl's bathroom, or the boy's bathroom. He went and wrote down the names, and it was known to be him. Wrote down a bunch of names of girls that should be raped. Like that, to me, was the point where we put that fucker in jail. Like that, like that's where, like, he's not even like, oh, he needs counseling. No, we're way past the counseling point. When you're threatening mass rape and like putting it out there like a hit list, go to jail. Straight to jail. Straight to jail.
Yeah. I mean, like, I remember, like, I mean, I think there's a lot of, like, I think there's kind of some wiggle room. I think that there's a lot of young, like, one of the things that I think was really hard kind of being a young man in this kind of era, one of the hardest years to be, like, a young man who wasn't like drowning in pussy was 2018 to 2019. And it was because of the incels. Because, like, if you complained at all about women, or you complained at all about women, or you even had like some like angry impulses, they would just call you a fucking incel. And like they would call you a fucking incel. And it's like, it was just one of those things where like people just need to, they would just call you an incel. And that's the thing, is I think there's a lot of...
there isn't a counter to that. You can't tell, like, when a man is complaining about women, and you can make your arguments about, like, are you just speaking truth or are you whining? That's a separate debate. But you could say, like, if you're whining about women, you're being an incel or whatever. But if you're whining about men, they're like, you're a hero. Thank you for speaking your truth. Like that, there's no equivalent. There's no where you could be like, I hear you bitch about men all the time. So
yeah, or like, like, I mean, like,
but there are like they do that, but it's either the complaints are good, or the complaints are so retarded and terrible, like no one wants to take the time to like explain it to that person.
Yeah, and it's like you look at, like, obviously, like, someone like Elliot Rodger was like somebody, and obviously, like, I just think that, like, there's this thing where I think that there is like an argument, like, you have to make that that clear. For there's kind of, with the incel subreddit, for instance, which was the big kind of, before Reddit really cracked down on them, like, before, like, there was that big, like, car where that guy in Toronto, like, kind of just killed everybody with his car. Like, murdered everybody with his car. He, there was, like, a bunch of incel subreddits, and a lot of these kids were just random kids that just had some anger, and maybe even, like, some fantasies of mass shootings, but not in, like, a really serious way. But what the media was doing, what the media was doing, what social media was doing, is to understand these people, and understand they just went straight to condemning. Like, it was just straight to condemnation. It was straight to, if anybody was on that incel subreddit, and I wasn't, but if anybody was just on those incel subreddit, it was like ContraPoints did like a very long video on incels, and she kept saying, I'm not supporting incels, or I'm not even like I'm not even saying like incel birth or anything like that.
Well, no one wanted to think deeply about the incel issue because there is, and I think it's a fair response to push back against weak men that are bitching. But putting that aside, when you have, and it's a broader sort of a debate, but when you have a society where women are more promiscuous, and more so where women are just less likely to settle down earlier on one man. What that and if that's just how everyone is, what that translates to is a handful of guys banging all the women, and like a bunch of guys just sort of being left like without being able to compete for the attention.
Yeah.
Like if the only thing a woman cares about in a man and is looking for is his dick and how well he can perform in bed, then she's not going to pay attention to a whole bunch of men that just don't measure up through no fault of their own with that one, super alpha porn star looking dude. And so that dude's going to be banging everything for a long time. And you have this issue where there's all these guys that are sort of waiting around for their wife to get over their hoe period and come and be serious. And there's a debate to be had about man whores and what all that means. But for me, it's very much like most people should be in a monogamous relationship, and a handful of people are built for the other way and the other lifestyle. But anywho, I also think if prostitution was legal, we wouldn't have an incel issue. If men could just go and pay $100 or $500, like you wouldn't have the same kind of a lacking, because the truth is there's some guys that literally. So here's the thing: if you have enough money to where the woman can just be a prostitute to you, that's legal. Are Donald Trump and Melania, like she said, do you think I'd be with him if he didn't have money? And he said, or someone said that he had said, I wouldn't be with her if she wasn't pretty. Like, I don't think Donald Trump, like, he probably respects and admires Melania specifically for certain traits that go beyond her looks, but for many, many people, it's essentially a prostitution type of a dynamic. And it's just like when it's out in the open and bare bones, people push back. But I think you were sort of saying that wouldn't solve the problem, right? Or what
I
were
don't
you?
think that would solve the problem. Fuck my thing.
Is your battery going low?
No, it's not going low. It's just it keeps just going under for some reason. But but my problem with it is I think it's deeper than just getting your dick wet. I think a lot of it is. I do think legal prostitution would help a lot, but it's one of those things like gun control, where like I think legal prostitution is to incels what gun control is to mass shootings, where I think legal prostitution would solve a lot, but I also think there's a lot of incels that are not necessarily in it just to have sex, but they're in it just to be in a loving monogamous relationship. Like that's a big part.
No, it's definitely like most people.
Do you mind if we start a new live?
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, let's start a new live. Okay, cool. Bye.
Okay.